Hey everyone, and welcome to the Drum Club podcast. We are back for 2023, and we are so excited to be here. We are powered by Collision Drumsticks, and the Drum Club is the #1 drumming podcast, giving you an access all areas pass to conversations on topics that range from drumming, mindset, entrepreneurship, the music business, and so much more. Right? Each week, we bring you guys exciting and exclusive discussions featuring independent and signed artists, as well as speakers, touring and award-winning musicians, and industry experts. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the button to keep up to date with new videos, announcements, and always exclusive content. Like and comment below your thoughts about our conversation today. This week on the Drum Club podcast, we are joined by session drummer, producer, recording, and mixing engineer Callum Edwards. A finalist in the UK-wide Young Drummer of the Year contest back in 2013, Callum has since gone on to work with artists including The Script, Tom Walker, Madness, the Red Hot Chili Pipers, Cameron Barnes, Craig Irvin, and Ross Miller, to name a few, and has toured and performed exclusively around the UK, Europe, Asia, and the US. You can find Callum on social media at Callum Edwards Music. With that being said, and what an intro, Callum, I want to kind of cover all of that today. How are you, and welcome to the Drum Club?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah. Thanks for having me along. It's really cool.
Absolutely. And, officially back for 2023. You are the first guest we brought on for the new year.
Oh, nice.
How does that make you feel? How exciting, right? For February.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that, so no pressure.
Not at all. No, honestly, it's absolutely brilliant to have you. As always, we really appreciate your time today. And obviously, we're going to have an incredible conversation. So let's start right there. How has 2023 been going for you so far when it comes to obviously the studio, the environment you're in? We're going to cover it all.
So it's been interesting so far. It's been busy and not been busy at the same time. It's kind of come in waves when it's been busy. So me and my girlfriend, we actually were on holiday for the first 10 days of January, which was great because last year, as I'm sure everyone knows, was totally chaotic. It was just like 3 years worth of stuff happened in the space of about 6 months. And then even getting into like November, December, they're always busy with the Christmas parties and all that usual stuff. So it was quite good to just collapse in on the 1st of January and just be like, right, I'm going away. I'm not touching a computer. I'm not touching a pair of drumsticks for like 10 days. So that was pretty cool. And then I came back and I had about a week or so off, which was great because it gave me a chance to kind of do some work in here. I had some just general boring admin and janitorial tasks to do. And then I actually ended up with some Burns suppers for those who are not from Scotland. They're like a Robert Burns is like a Scottish poet, and a lot of people like to celebrate his birthday, which coincidentally is my birthday as well, actually.
Wow.
So you're always guaranteed work round about your birthday, which is kind of cool. So I was in London for a couple of days with the Red Hot Chili Pipers, like you said. I'm sure we'll get on to chatting about them soon. And then there's just been a couple other things happening in here. It's been quite quiet, but it's been good, I think, just to kind of reset a little bit. I've been able to actually just practice and play drums for fun for the first time in a long time.
Wow.
Last year, I think I was playing so much that when I wasn't out gigging or recording or whatever, I either wanted to do something else or I just didn't have time to. So, but yeah, it's been good. I can't believe we're halfway through February already, though. It's pretty mental. It's flying through, but I'm quite enjoying the kind of peace and quiet at the moment because I know as soon as we hit like April and May, it's just gonna take off. It'll
Absolutely.
be back to the usual.
100%. Well, so much to unpack in there. Well, it's great to hear that you had a wonderful trip with Mrs. That's fabulous. And sounds like January was quite a lot of R&R, like rest and recovery. And is that something that you factor in? Is it kind of up to date now? Like within the last year, have you realized that that's an important part of your process, Callum, or is it something that you've always traditionally done in January or in those early months in the year?
I think it has become a tradition and it's something that I do benefit from. I think the reason for it happening then is just because it is a quiet month. You're obviously off the back end of the festive season. Everyone's not got as much money and everyone's just got a bit of the January blues. So there's not as much happening anyway. So I think for me, it's quite important to try and just not sit around and do nothing. So for me, it's good to try and embark on a couple of personal projects. Glasgow's actually great in January, towards the end of January, because we have a really big festival called Celtic Connections, which is like a folk kind of worlds. They do everything, to be honest. So that normally happens from about the this year it was the kind of last 2 weekends in January and the start of February, and there's loads happening in the city. Even just to actually go to gigs is quite fun. I don't really get to do that a huge amount
Sounds like
because
I was going to
January's
say, just
quiet.
to
So
just interject, it sounds like to me you're getting back to kind of what it means to be a drummer. You know, going to shows, getting back behind the kit. You said, and I wrote it down, playing for fun. Like these things, I think when you first start, you know, your drumming endeavors, you know, quote unquote career, I guess. You know, we always start for different reasons. For me, I'm sure for you, Callum, again, we wanted to just hit record and go straight live, and we're gonna have the luxury of getting to know one another today on the podcast. But for me, it was always a passion first, and then obviously from that we've carved this incredible career and of it a brand. But it sounds like for you, you're really getting back to the roots for what it means to be
yeah,
a drummer to you, right?
I think as well, and the economy nowadays, and being a freelancer, you can't just be I'm a drummer. It's like, I mean, for me it's like I also do the recording thing. I know a lot of other people try and do a lot of freelance avenues, so although you say it's like I'm a professional musician, there's lots and lots of things that are round about that kind of central core. It's not just playing drums all the time, as much as I wish it was, and as much as I wish it could be the rest of the year. Like you're saying, it's good to just kind of own that identity for a couple of months every year before it gets mental again. But yeah, for sure.
I think it's important as well to kind of remind the folks at home that are watching. And guys, don't forget to subscribe and also take a look at some of the other incredible musicians that we've interviewed as well so far throughout the industry. But, you know, Cam, a lot of these artists will sit at home and think, you know, looking at you, looking at the incredible studio, that like drum emporium behind you, and we'll get into it. But, you know, they'll sit there and go, you know, overnight success, you know, he's 9 to 5, he's doing this day in, day out. But actually, that's not always the case. It's you know, being a musician is combined with so many different components and so many things like that. So can we dive into a bit of kind of how you got started, like your earliest context when it comes to obviously finding your way to the kit? Was it friends? Was it family? Was it folks or the means that got you involved in music? How did you first get started? How did we get here today?
Yeah, so there was a few kind of combinations, a combination of things that happened. So, my mum and dad, when I was growing up, when I was quite young, they were in like a sort of like church kind of praise group sort of thing. It was a really big, like 20-piece ensemble with like folk singing and all sorts. So, the running joke when my mum was pregnant with me was that I was going to end up being musical, because like she always said that when they were rehearsing with this group, she could like feel me like kicking away when I was in the stomach and all that. So my mum and dad are both musical. They both play piano. My mum does like church choir stuff. My dad does like local theatre and that sort of thing. So they're both piano players. So it is the kind of the slight running joke in the family. It's like, oh, you chose the drums and all this. But so there was always music in the house. When growing up, there was always like, you know, a massive CD collection. Remember those things? It was like a little disc you could put music on.
I know, right? Millennia ago. I know. It kind of does my set out, right? Crazy. Thing of the past now, relic, my man.
But you mentioned mini discs the other day. I was like, oh, I have like a vague recollection of them being a thing for like 10 minutes. Anyway,
Discos and DJs, all that good stuff. MIDI, my gosh, that was an era of itself. I remember working with a DJ and seeing him pull those out and thinking to myself, what are they? You know, yeah. Go look them up if you don't know what they are.
Yeah. So like in a massive CD collection, I remember like being super young, around about Christmas, it was always like Elton John and like good folk like that always playing. So I used to have like biscuit tins in my bedroom that I put toys in, and I always tip the toys out and I'd be battering them. So I think eventually my mum and dad got the hint that they needs to get me some sort of drum kit. Fortunately at the time we lived in like a let me get this right, a semi-detached house. So like we had neighbours on either side. So we couldn't really get a full drum kit. But luckily my dad's work circumstances changed. We ended up moving. So we used to live in Glasgow, which is where I live now. And we moved to a wee town called Largs, which is about 30 miles away. It's by the sea. So when we moved there, we ended up having a detached house. So I think the time was right then to get a drum kit, so a proper drum kit rather. So we moved in the October, and my birthday in January. I got my first drum kit, which coincidentally is actually this one right here behind me. Yeah, it's a 1960s or 70s Premier Olympic. And,
all those years later.
I sold it to my pal for years, and I've regretted it so much. I was like, every day I was just like, I shouldn't have sold that drum kit. And then eventually he was like, I'm not playing anymore. Do you want this thing back? And I think you know, that way it's like you only realize what you have once it's gone. I realized like how much sentimental value that thing had. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I got it back again. So that's a bit of a cool story. So yeah, I remember for my birthday, like, you know, the usual, like you get the cake and a few small presents and stuff. And then I was like, why are we going out to the garage at 9 o'clock at night? This is really strange. And then of course drum kit was there. So that was kind of like the where it sort of started. And then I used to just like, you know, I would like race home from school every day and just want to play drums. It was like all I wanted to do. All the way through school. I used to drive my teachers mad, like drumming on the table all the time and not doing any work because I was too busy thinking about drums or about music or whatever. So, it's obviously worked out because I get to do that all the time now. But I can see why non-music people would maybe get a little bit frustrated at that. But yeah, so that was kind of early years. I kept on playing all through school. When I was in high school, I had a fantastic music teacher called Craig Smith, who I'm still in touch with actually. And there's a lot of other people who came through the school as well who have like were taught by Craig and they were encouraged to like go on and do music or performing arts. Like a couple of like total wild cards. Like he used to teach James McAvoy, the actor, and James McAvoy says that Craig Smith's the reason that he went on to do what he did. And it's even random things like when I first joined the Chili Pipers, the guy who was the monitor engineer, he was also from Largs and he had exactly the same thing as me. And we're about 15 years apart at school. So we'd never crossed paths there, but he was like, yeah, Craig is the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. So he was great. He was just, you know, he was totally off the wall. He kind of like didn't have the kind of traditional approach to teaching. He wasn't your stereotypical music teacher. He was always keeping me and a load of other guys really involved with lots of music stuff. And a lot of the guys that I was playing with at school, I still get to collaborate with today, which is like amazing. And I think that speaks for itself in terms of Craig and in terms of what he did for all us as well, and the fact that we're all wanting to do it. So it got to a bit of a crossroads when I was coming to the end of high school because I was like, do I want to go into this full time? Do I not? So I kind of took a half and half approach. I ended up moving back to Glasgow for uni, and I went to Glasgow and I studied like electrical engineering with music on the side. So I kind of felt it was good to have a fallback just in case at the end of 4 years of uni I decided that I wanted to get an office job or an engineering job or whatever. I didn't, and thankfully I was in a position where I was able to still go full time at the end of uni. I mean, it was like my pals used to always get really frustrated with me because every Saturday night they'd want to go out and socialize, and I'd be like, "Oh, I need to go and gig again." But I don't regret doing that by any means because it meant that when I was halfway through my fourth year, so in Scotland we do 4 years at uni instead of three, which I know they do in England. So got to halfway through fourth year, I was doing my dissertation, and I was like, you know what, I actually really want to have a crack at this. And I was in a fortunate enough position that there was enough stuff happening music wise that I actually could transition. So that was great. I graduated in June of 2019. Had the best summer of my life. Was traveling all over Japan and America with the Chili Pipers, just playing loads and loads of gigs. Everything seemed great. I was like, I'm living the dream. This is fantastic. Got to the end of 2019. I was like, oh, I'm so excited for what 2020 has in store. And then the rest of this story tells itself, I think. But yeah, so that was kind of at pre-COVID. During COVID, obviously there wasn't a lot happening. There was definitely a few months we all had where we just didn't really want to, didn't feel like being creative. I couldn't play my drums because I was stuck at my flat in Glasgow. I didn't really want to as well. I think it was just there was the kind of mental and physical trauma almost of having everything cancelled and everything that was going on. It just wasn't a good headspace to be in for playing. So that was about 4 months where I was kind of not really doing very much. And I know I'm not alone in that. I know a lot of other people were the same. Very much in the mindset of I'm never going to complain about doing a gig again as long as things go. So that 2020 obviously was a total write-off. Didn't do a single gig. Couple of random little recording sessions and whatnot, and then would have been round about the start of 2021, the summer of 2021, sorry, round about the start then, so kind of May, June time, couple of weddings and stuff started opening up. I actually started working at a drum shop as well in Glasgow called Drummers Only. You probably know some of the guys there. They used to have the shop down in Leeds as well, which is obviously down your way.
Great team.
So
Good lads, Adam and all the team
yeah,
over
no,
there.
that was
Yeah,
brilliant. So
especially in your base, your site. I know Leeds. It was a shame when things got packed up there, but and I love their content as well. It's just fantastic. I think it really stands out, and I think as a drum store, they are certainly kind of positioned, not just well in the north, but also kind of nationally as well. I think
yeah,
you're a part of a great team. Fabulous.
they put a lot of emphasis on creating the content as well. So they've got a really great social media guy called Adam McEachran.
Yep, that's him.
He
So,
puts it
yeah,
all
Adam's
together.
good.
Brilliant. He just like he can see weeks into the future. Right? He's so good at planning the content. He had an office in the shop, and on the wall it was just a great big whiteboard that just had everything that the shop was going to put out weeks and weeks in advance. So hats off to him. It was really great working with him, and just I feel like I learned a lot about social media just from seeing how unchaotic his approach was
Yeah,
compared to mine.
I can
So
imagine. And on that, before we go any further, just if you'll allow, because I know there's so much to unpack there, and I know the artists at home will get so much more value out of this if I just pause for 1 second, just because I have a couple of questions. When it comes, Callum, and what an incredible journey. And there's so many parallels, I'll say this, to your story and mine. Like, my kit was in the garage the first time round when I was a youngster, and getting invited to go out for my birthday, which is also in January. I decided to pursue Collision post uni was something that I transitioned with as well. Went to law school, degree in hand, decided to run into the world of Collision like on the so graduated on the Friday, started Collision on the Monday type thing, but
yeah.
always with kind of a plan in mind. When it came to obviously transitioning over, you kind of flashed forward between like getting the degree and then or completing that and then straight on the road Japan. You were listing them off. When it came to obviously that, there was huge preparation involved behind that. For those drummers who maybe either may not necessarily have a similar kind of story to yours, or even if they do, what tips or strategies or words of wisdom do you have for those artists that maybe are going through a pivotal point in their kind of music kind of genre or kind of life where they're going, right, is it time to make the right move into music? Is it time to call it a day? Is it like, what are some of those factors like work, networking? Because it sounds to me like it was that kind of perfect storm, but you were the person behind that, catalyzing that, and also this wonderful kind of influence of teachers, family. What's some advice you have for those artists who are watching?
I think on a practical level, the thing that kind of sold it for me was making sure that I had enough of a kind of rolling diary that would ensure that everything wouldn't go south. So for me, I'd always sort of said I'd want to have at least kind of 6 months in the diary in advance. So when I was starting to consider what to do, because uni finishes really early in the year, I feel like I didn't really appreciate that. It got to December of 2018. I was in the middle of dissertation, or final year project as it was, and I was just, I've got ages to go. I've got like 6 months to worry about what happens next. And then I was like, actually, it's not a hugely long time. You kind of by the end of March, you need to have things wrapped up. And so when it got to April, I was like, right, okay. So looking ahead, there was one day I remember I was sitting in uni and I got an email from Kev, who's the director of the Chili Pipers, with a load of dates in it, and that filled so many gaps in the diary perfectly that when I was looking ahead, I was like, okay, I've got enough work each month until September, as it was about 6 months in advance, that I was like, I'll at least be fine until then. If it doesn't happen, then there's always scope to go and do something else. So I think it's almost like forward planning and preparation. Always keep an eye on the diary in the future, because, well, as I think COVID proved, it's like, you can suddenly find yourself dead in the water. And that's a very, very unusual situation. I hope and pray we never find ourselves in that kind of situation again. But just about the forward planning aspect, making sure that you've got a contingency plan, if I was always very much prepared. It was like, if the diary stuff is a little bit quieter, like I said, January and February for me typically is always kind of quiet. It was always sort of like looking at maybe other bits and bobs of work you can pick up, even if it's like, doing like Uber driving or like Uber Eats or Deliveroo or something like that. Something that can just get you over the line in the quiet months. And I really think there's no shame in that. A lot of people would very much have the attitude of like, oh, I'm not being a professional musician. It's like, well, you're support and future you to try and do that. So I think it's like forward planning, preparation. Always make sure that you've got enough work in the diary, and if you don't, then there's obviously steps you can take to do that. A very hard thing that I had to do, and I'm quite a shy and reserved person. Sometimes I really hate like messaging people just to kind of remind them that you exist or that you're free for gigs, which you have to do sometimes. And it's like I always just like struggle with the kind of crippling self-doubt of like, oh, what's this person going to think if I message them, being like, hey, I'm free, I've got gaps in my diary, and they're always totally fine, and they're always like, oh, that's amazing that you messaged, I actually was looking for someone for this date. So as well, it's just putting yourself out there and always trying to ignore that little voice in your head that says, oh, but what if this and what if that. Just go for it. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen is someone's going to say, oh, thanks for getting in touch, I don't have any space for, I don't have anything for you at the moment. Maybe very unusually, they might be like, go away, you're annoying me, but I've never had that
I've
myself.
never heard that either. And I
Yeah.
think, that positive attitude that you carry as well. I tell you what, I would not have realized that you were a shy person on the podcast, and I don't think anyone would, I think everyone will agree with me, and I don't think anyone else would have realized. But you know what? I know for us drummers, it can be a difficult thing to pick the phone up and to start kind of getting almost client facing, and especially when it comes to obviously, start kind of prodding people and pressing people for opportunities and things like that. It's not something that we're all experts in to begin with, and it's something that kind of grows over time, but it's not something you necessarily get kind of used to either. Kind of coming out of COVID, I'm sure you obviously felt like that as well, going through that, because we were all in this circumstance where we were all in it together. There wasn't one region that was doing significantly better than everyone else. Unfortunately, it was just a complete freak, kind of once in a generation event. But
Mm-hmm.
you transitioned very, I would say, effectively, and you had the kind of foresight to make a change in your career path, which has really turned out to be very successful and lucrative for yourself. I mean, when we went into the pandemic, I know you've already kind of talked about kind of almost the lights being turned off for gigs and opportunities. What was the initial kind of idea in terms of putting the plan together for the studio, and kind of what were the feelings at the time of doing that? Because obviously gigs were taken away off the table, opportunities were. You might have had to step outside of the industry, as you mentioned. Kind of, can you talk us through that kind of situation, and obviously how you were able to put a plan step by step to be able to execute that kind of at that higher level? Because I know we're proud to announce that you'll be joining us for February's masterclass as part of our backstage event. We'll talk about that in a little while, but I really want to go into kind of just highbrow today, and then we'll really go into depth later on.
Sure. So the studio, as in this current form, was birthed last year. We'll get into that in a minute. Again, there's a big epic story here, like there always is with me. So yeah, about 4 months into the pandemic, living circumstances changed and whatnot. When things opened up again, because we had that little kind of phase during the summer of 2020 where gigs weren't back, but we could see people again. You were allowed to go into folks' houses, and it sounds totally mental actually just saying that out loud. It was like, oh, you're right, I was allowed to go see my gran. Like, so during that time, my living circumstances changed, and I actually decided there's not really much for me in Glasgow at the moment. I love Glasgow to bits. I think it's a great city to live and work. But it's amazing. I'm sure any city would feel like this when you can't see your pals, when you're not doing your job, when you're not out socializing or doing anything that the city kind of has to offer. It was really boring, and it almost felt quite lonely because a lot of friends of mine, they'd all had to move home, and a lot of friends of mine had moved back to Largs, which is the town where I'm from. So I took a bit of a step into the unknown. I was like, you know what, just for now, I'm going to move back home. And it was actually brilliant. It was so good to spend so much time with my parents again, because I don't manage home a huge amount now. So when I moved back home in the June of 2020, I was trying to formulate a plan of what to do next. So a part of that was my parents very generously donated their little study room to me to be a home studio, which was amazing. It was like a totally perfect size for, it had a little space. It was like, I think it was about 2 meters by 3 meters. So it was literally the perfect size to have like a little kind of control room mix and bit. enough space for a drum kit, some treatment and stuff like that. What to do for backstage on Tuesday, I'll bring some photos of the old studio and then the new studio and stuff like that, so it'll make a little bit more sense of if folk are imagining what it was like. So this was fantastic. It was just like having a little like safe haven where you could just escape from all the nonsense that was happening. So off the back of that, I'd always been into recording. I did a lot of stuff at uni, involving the kind of process of recording, spending time in studios, and I've spent quite a bit of time in studios as well as a performer. So I had a reasonably kind of decent understanding of a lot of the technical aspects in terms of like certain, the difference between like a dynamic and a condenser mic and all the kind of high level stuff. But for me, it was a really, really good time to get into more of the creative aspect of recording, more the listening thing. Instead of thinking like, oh, I'm going to use an SM57 on the snare drum because that's what I was told to do. It's actually like putting that mic on the drum and being like, oh, I wonder what this one sounds like, and just trying stuff out. And as dreadful as COVID was, it was good just to have a bit of space to actually just have some time to experiment and really, really get to know the process. And that's something I still do now. If I have a day off in here, I'll just come in and chuck some mics around and play around, make lots of daft noises. So that was the kind of first stage of that. And then in the October of that year, a pal of mine in Glasgow called Gus Stirrett, he actually offered me, well, I asked him, it was sort of like a mutual thing. He was looking for someone to assist at some sessions and I was up for learning. So I went and sat in with Gus for a couple of months when restrictions and whatnot allowed. And that was great because I knew Gus really well through he's a bass player, well known in the session scene in Glasgow. And I've recorded a few times in his studio as well. So that was great seeing it from the other side. Literally, he was so patient with me. He was up for answering all the mental questions I had. He basically would say to me during the day at a session, he was like, just park all these questions in the back of your mind, and at the end of the day, we'll have a little question and answer session. So it was great. It was just like questions that you'd think were like really daft, just like, oh, what does a patch bay do and stuff. He was just totally up for answering all those questions multiple times over. In a lot of cases, he let me get my hands dirty in terms of going around miking stuff up. So that was great for me. I think that was probably key because I'd say that most of the kind of methods that I use for recording stuff have kind of either come directly from what I learned in Gus's studio, or I've kind of derived myself from stuff that I learned there and been like, okay, that's cool. Here's how I'm going to take it and do it my way or do it differently. So that was fantastic. That was probably the kind of the sort of springboard into the studio world that I needed in terms of like, oh, okay, I feel like I could try and have a commercial or have the studio as a commercial enterprise, because I was trying to market myself as the kind of remote session thing, which is cool. I think it's fantastic that you can do that nowadays, and you've obviously got guys like Paul Maybury and Aaron Sterling like cutting records for like Taylor Swift and John Mayer in their house. It's like, it's bananas that we're at that kind of stage now. But for me, actually transitioning away from, I still love doing all that stuff as well, but actually transitioning into doing the full package, because I had most of the gear. It was just the kind of knowledge and the application of how to use that equipment for more than just recording drums. And actually just seeing what Gus was doing in that studio in Glasgow, I was like, I felt like I could do it. I felt like it was like producing records doesn't need to be rocket science, or being a recording engineer or anything studio related. It's, if you're recording drums, you're like 80% of the way there in terms
Absolutely.
of, you got to set up a microphone, plug in an interface, and get some basic sounds up and running on your computer and whatever DAW you're using. That's half the battle, in my opinion. So then obviously we had round 2 of COVID that was taking us into 2021. So then I moved back to Largs again. But at that point, I'd accumulated all that knowledge. So I had a couple more months back at home in my own studio to kind of put all the stuff I'd learned into practice. And then when things opened up again in 2021, I did do a little bit less studio stuff just because there was so much stuff happening. I was working on Drummers Only at that point. That was mostly at the weekends. And there was other gigs as well and stuff. And I think just with the world being open again, it was great. There was, so much social stuff happening, and it just life was pretty chaotic from that point of view. Towards the end of last year, I kind of got back in. No, 2021, 2 years ago. Gosh, towards the end of 2021, I started making more frequent trips back home to Largs to use the studio, which was there. Taking on some more clients whenever I could. Mostly just pals or pals of pals. Um, but the game plan that I hatched at the start of 2022, or towards the end of 2021, was to try and get a space in Glasgow. For me, that kind of felt like the right next step. Obviously, I live here. Having a studio that's 40 minutes drive down the road is fine for your own stuff, but it's a lot to ask a client, especially if they don't drive, and just the back and forth was starting to get a little bit notorious. So I'd been looking for spaces all along, and nothing had come up. So during last year, again, it was the same sort of deal. January and February, very quiet. So I just was kind of nestled away. At that point as well, actually, my flatmate moved out, so I was able to kind of construct a sort of satellite studio in my flat, which was great. It meant I could do a bit of mixing, I could do a bit of producing, recording acoustic instruments. But for me, the biggest thing was like I can't play drums, I can't record my drums. That is my path into being a studio engineer. That is so much of what I do and what I love. So during last summer, I mean, like we touched on earlier, it was complete chaos. There was so much stuff happening, so many gigs. I mean, it was like for me, when I think back, 2021 was the year of gigs returning, but last year was the year of like foreign travel, touring gigs, like all that sort of stuff. So it was another step up from the year before in terms of busyness. So in the midst of all that, I was scrolling through Gumtree one day, and I saw someone advertising this another studio space in the building that I'm in here. So this is like a building that's just full of lots of creative studios and whatnot. So I got in touch with her, and she showed me around the building. And she went to show me into this room, and one of the bits on the keys had like split off, so she couldn't actually get the door open. So it was one of these like hilariously like typical circumstances where I was going to Europe to play a few festivals over the weekend. This would have been like on I think it was a Friday. So she couldn't show me the room. She showed me around the rest of the building. I was like, this is perfect. There's like a little coffee place in the room. It's got like a roof terrace up the stairs. Is bonkers.
Oh,
I was
like,
I love
coffee.
I love that setup, but it's really near my flat as well, which is another bonus. But she couldn't actually show me into the room. So I said to her, I was like, listen, like I'm really, really keen to try and see what this room's all about. Can I come first thing on Monday morning? And she was like, I've got a few other folk that might want to view the space, but I'll hold it till Monday morning just for you. I was like, thank you so much, that's amazing. So pretty much from there, I ran straight home. And then last year there was like flights getting cancelled left, right, and center. So a lot of the trips we did were like there was like daft logistics trying to get places, and again, it's no one's fault. It was just like a lot of the time you were just have to kind of book the flights that you could get. So we drove overnight to Manchester, and we flew out to Spain for a festival. This festival we played at like 3 a.m. or something like that. It's so hot during the day; these festivals start really late. After that gig, we went straight to the airport and flew to France. So basically, I had no sleep this entire weekend, and the whole time I'm away, I'm just thinking like about this studio room, and just like almost like a bit of anxiety over like, would it be perfect? Would I get it? You know, like would it still be there when I got back on Monday morning, or would someone else have snapped it up? So after that gig in France, I think that was a Sunday, we had about an hour's sleep in a hotel, and then we flew straight back to Edinburgh. I drove straight from Edinburgh Airport to the studio building here, by which point they'd managed to crack the door open. I went in, took one look at it. I was like, this is a totally perfect size. I'll take it. And then I think I went home and slept for about 18 hours after that.
That's incredible.
Just
and
like,
if you hadn't,
like,
Callum, you'd have been cracking the door in yourself after all of that nightmare weekend. Like, what an amazing kind of set of circumstances lined up. I was like, yeah. I was on the edge of my seat. I was like, did he get it? Didn't he get it? Did he take it on? Didn't he get through even through the door? Let alone did he get the lease and take on the property? You know, unbelievable. I thought, you know, what an incredible story, and here you are. I mean, and everyone's been watching throughout the podcast, and it's just it looks absolutely fabulous. It looks like you've just really made it your own, right? You know, I can see kind of bit of the control booth and everything.
When I finally managed to get in here and just seeing the size it was like, it's perfect. It's not too small. Space was a bit of an issue in my previous room. Like I could fit a drum kit in and record it, no problem. But you'd have to, like, if you wanted to sort a bass drum mic or change anything on that front, you'd have to crawl around the kit if you even could in some cases. So just having like the space around the kit, there's loads of space for room mics and ambient mics and stuff as well, which I love. Again, it's like I've got my whole kind of producing setup as well. I've been able to do treatment and all sorts, so it's worked out totally perfectly. And like you're saying, just like the set of circumstances that it came out of, it's just like, it's a great story. First of all, it's just like every time I'm retelling it, I'm just like remembering like just sitting in all these buses and planes, just like, am I gonna get it? Am I not? Am I gonna get it? Am I not? You know, and slowly going more and more insane as we got more and further into the trip with less sleep. But yeah, so that was I think that was in July that happened. I got the keys at the start of August, and within about 2 months or so, there was lots of DIY. I don't really know if you can see very well here, but like I put like the laminate floor that went down here.
Oh, we
that
see it. Love it.
all had to go. All the treatment that's kind of around here and up here and whatnot, that all had to. I did all that myself. And then even after that, it was then like actually consolidating all the gear that I've got into one place. So there was like some stuff in my parents' house, some stuff at my girlfriend's flat, some stuff in my flat, stuff in my car, like everywhere. So being able to just actually have it all here is great, but the process of collecting it all up and putting it in here was just like, it was insanity. There was just like stuff everywhere. And then just seeing it all in one place, I was like, I have a lot of stuff, and then having to buy shelves and find space for all the stuff to go. But after the kind of initial phase of DIY and everything being mental, and even doing things like having to learn how to like pour self-leveling concrete and the stuff you never thought you'd have to do, and hopefully something I'll not have to do again for a while, as it's horribly messy. But after the initial kind of 3 months or so of hard work, it's been great just to reap the benefits of that. And it's exactly kind of what I'd envisioned it to be, which is just like, you know, somewhere that I can make music with people that I maybe don't know so well, make their music, but also a space for me and other people that I do collaborate with regularly to be creative and write stuff and record and whatnot. So there's been such a good balance of like working with clients, but also working with like folk that I work with regularly as well. Just it being a collaborative space. I think that's like, for me, seeing all the other studios that I've ever worked in, they've put such an emphasis in like the community aspect and the collaborative thing, not just being a machine that churns in, you know, brings in clients and churns out money. I mean, it's like, although making profit a lot of the time can be important, I feel like that always comes second to the way that as a musician you get treated when you go to these places, and the contacts that you make, and just like how it makes you feel being part of a cool community like that. So for me, that was a really, really big thing of what I wanted this place to be, and it's always kind of at the forefront of how I'm going to try and run a studio as well. So yeah,
love that.
That's just
that mission's awesome.
Here we are.
Very cool.
I don't know what comes next, but I'm just enjoying the space that we're in at the moment. So yeah, it's cool.
Well, thank you for sharing. I mean, it's incredible. You know, so much I'm sure artists can unpack in their own time, and obviously, you know, really connect with on a personal level. You know, whether it's obviously experiences like the one we already had kind of talked about, that, you know, when you have to leave an incredible opportunity and sit it on the table because you've got yet another incredible opportunity, kind of in your kind of foresight to go and, you know, take that trip, take that show, come back and hope that it's still there. These things come up, right? When it rains, it pours, not just with, you know who and use, but also with opportunity. It's kind of like that kind of, you know, you're drinking from the kind of tap, you know, on the pipe, right? You can't stop these opportunities coming at you, and you've just got to kind of land where you landed. You've got to, you know, again, I think a lot of your early days, kind of when you were first kind of carving your story and journey as an artist, really helped you along the way, kind of planning the kind of things you spoke about earlier, Callum, like the 6 months in the diary, like kind of, I can see kind of where your way of thinking aligns with obviously how you became successful as an artist, and obviously is now a producer and as a mixing engineer, which is fabulous. But I think you're exactly where you need to be. I think you're in the perfect environment to really champion and foster what you're doing, and not just for you, but for the clients as well. And I may add, the purpose aspect of what you do over profit, I think, is really important. And I think that's something that, you know, we clearly tell you're coming from an amazing place, and you know, you want to leave the artist not just with the best mix, but also feeling really good about obviously, you know, their future as an artist as well. Let me ask you this, Callum: is there anything that you feel you may have done differently or maybe missed out on in terms of skill set, apart from pouring concrete, right? Because obviously that wasn't something that, I'm sure that again, I could never see myself doing that. But maybe if you add a second room or a
No,
second level, you might
believe
have
it's
to go
something
back
that
to it.
I kind of
But yeah,
believe it's something to learn at this point, because you never know when you'll need it. So,
that's it, right? But yeah, is there anything kind of in terms of skill sets or anything you feel that, if I could have gone back, or if looking back, I had learned that it would have been, better to have focused on maybe, or, would you change nothing?
um, it's an interesting question actually, because I think as artists, a lot of the time we can be so retrospective of, as in terms of like, oh, what have I done this, or what have I done that, and like for me, I'm such an overthinker and such a worrier a lot of the time that like you can totally get into that kind of bear trap of like, oh, have I done this or have I done that? But I think weirdly, like everything's worked out so well for this studio space that like in terms of like the time frame that I was able to do everything in, the time frame that it came up, even just like things like the location and stuff like that was all so perfect when I took out the lease in the space that I was, kind of happy and willing to do whatever I had to do to kind of get it up and running as a functioning studio. There wasn't too many kind of obstacles in the way. Again, I've been quite carefully sort of working with the idea in mind that I would get a bigger studio at some point. So a lot of the gear that I was purchasing, even if it was like I don't necessarily have space to use stuff such as this, like even just like things like the rock wool for the panels, like a friend of my mum and dad's, they were moving house and they were giving loads of that stuff away. So I was just like, great, I'll take it and I'll stash it in my dad's shed. And so I think things like that, it's like I guess trying to plan for the future. It sounds like a really generic answer, but if you have a vision in mind for something like a studio is a great example, because um you're always going to try and planning you're always going to try and be forward planning for what comes next in terms of whatever gear you're going to purchase or whatever. So for me, the big thing, as soon as I decided that I was going to try and have the studio in Glasgow, was just collecting random things like building materials, trying to have that sort of foresight in terms of what to channel your finances into and whatnot. I mean, I guess I would have maybe done a bit more research into things like acoustics, concrete, but I think a lot of that stuff you end up learning on the job. It was like I knew the time frame that I had to get it finished in, because I delayed a bunch of clients from August whilst I was doing the renovation, and they were gratefully very happy to move stuff to like end of September, October. And even there was a few that I still had to push back because I was like, the place isn't actually totally ready yet because something hasn't arrived or whatever. So that obviously made life a lot easier for that point of view. But a lot of the things that a lot of the jobs that needed done, I was almost kind of learning them on the job. I was doing research on acoustics as I was going along, building a panel and then kind of deciding where it should go. So maybe, I guess in retrospect, do a bit more forward planning and research, but I wasn't like overly fortunate with the time frame that I had, because I feel like, if I'd had another month, I would have done some things differently, I guess. But
Yeah.
you can't really plan
Hey,
for that.
that's
I guess it's
hindsight, isn't
not,
it? I think it's
but
great to see that you had really put so much thought into, the planning, in every stage of your career. And I think that's why you are as successful as you are. And I think that's, a tip and a real kind of lesson for everyone at home. Because I think as often as we kind of talk drummer to drummer, I think, squirrel mindset comes up quite often. We're here, we're there, we're everywhere. We've got so many drums to hit, so much to do. And, we're doing so many things and working with so many people at any given time. It's like, gosh, you don't know where you are and you can't often see the wood for the trees. And, I think it's so important to run with a plan, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's the next single, whether it's the next merch launch, whether it's the next post on social media. Because I think if we go without a plan and we're trying to fly by the seat of our pants and, fly the plane first and build it second, yeah, sometimes it calls for that, especially if it's like a real last minute opportunity that you just absolutely can't say no to, or something in a similar situation. It's you start changing things. You start, like you said, the doubt, the question that comes. If you have a plan in mind, there's a reason why the plan's in place. There's a reason why you put those dominoes there in the first place. Whether you were in a better mindset, it was a better time, or there was less pressure at the time when you were constructing the plan. So I just think it's a lesson to all today in pivoting, transitioning. Again, we can't factor in acts of God and things like COVID, but you had kind of really put that work in early, and that was what obviously helped. And you called on that kind of as a skill set at a later stage, Cam. That's absolutely fabulous. I know we're crunching along and almost at time here, so I want to just take a moment to say a huge thank you. I've really enjoyed kind of catching up with you, and I've got plenty more questions, but you know what? That's exactly what our masterclass is going to be for next
Oh,
week. And it's happening, guys, Tuesday the 21st of February 2023. So if you're watching this again a little bit after that, you will still get access to the replay as well. In the masterclass, Callum is going to unpack and teach you guys some of the fundamentals around pivoting, as a musician, seizing further opportunities. As he mentioned, with 2020 bringing a halt to the entire music industry, Callum turned his attention obviously back towards production after years of obviously that hiatus. So, again, forming, Brookwood recording, absolutely fabulous. You can see a little bit into that. We're going to see some of the early photos as well of some of the different studios and the different iterations Callum had, in the early stages of finding his feet with the studio, but also for those drummers who just want to be in the environment in a room with other like-minded drummers. I think it's such a great environment, and I think everyone should definitely try it. So if you want to have a look, collisiondrumsticks.com/masterclass. Again, that is collisiondrumsticks.com/masterclass. And again, we'll post the link in the comments below. Callum, before I let you go, at the Drum Club, honestly, I love talking shop. So can you and I saw some photos on Instagram actually, and I saw a rack of snares, and I had to ask, are they yours? Because I don't see them on camera. If they are, I know you've already mentioned about that fabulous kit and what kind of full circle story that was, but talk to us about maybe some of the different snares you have whilst we've got a bit of time left.
yeah, sure. So they are my snares. If I turn the camera around here, you can see
Oh,
up
goodness
there.
me, that's fabulous.
So yeah, this is kind of like I built that out of like an old table and some old shelves. That was a project that me and my dad did last January when nothing was happening, as it became fairly abundantly clear that I had more snare drums than I knew what to do with. So yeah, I think for me it's like, I think the kind of stereotype of like collecting loads of snare drums, or it can be a bit of a stereotype, but for me it's like I can justify the reason why I have every single one of those drums. I know particularly like pals of mine who are like guitarists, they're always like having to like explain to folk like, oh, why they have this guitar and that guitar, and you're always at the mercy of like the dad patter of like, oh, have you not got enough of them and all that. But like for me it's like the tools of your trade, and it's like, if there's been so many situations I've been in where it's like, oh, it would have been great to have this snare or that snare or whatever. So most of the stuff I've either bought because I've had a need for it, or I've seen someone else play it and thought that would really suit me down to the ground. There is one or two impulse purchases in there, to be fair. I ended up buying a snare drum in Japan a few years back, but that was because it was a Yamaha drum, and I was like, you know what, I'm taking a bit of Japan home with me.
You got it.
And I think for a lot of the work that I do, you're flying and you're playing backline kits, and that's a great way to actually get to know other equipment as well. Because I only managed to get my hands on a Black Beauty this year, but I played them at a couple of gigs over the years when you've been flying. A lot of the time with backline, you might get like 2 or 3 snares for the kit, so you get to choose. So that's always quite fun as well, getting to kind of pick and choose. And there's been a lot of the drums I have are because of that, because I've played it and I've been like, that's great, I really liked it on that gig. And also as well, I think there's a lot of the time you come across a drum that you maybe don't really vibe with as well. Like the perfect example for me was I love my acrylite, my Ludwig acrylite. It's an aluminium shell. And I've also got 3 recording customs as well. One of the ones was bought in Japan, and I bought the brass one because one of the other drummers in the Red Hot Chili Peppers, he's got one of them, and I heard him play it at a gig, and I was like, I need one of those. So I had the aluminium recording custom on a backline hire once, and I was super excited because I'm like, I love the recording custom, and I love the acrylite, but I just didn't really vibe with it. I didn't like it as much as I'd kind of hoped for. So getting the chance to kind of experience that instead of like buying it and then kind of going, oh, I don't know if I'm as into that as I thought I would be. That's really cool, and I like that's a very unusual circumstance, and I totally understand that not everyone has that luxury. But I think it's great that like drum shops have such great selections of stuff you can use, and a big thing that when I worked at Drummers Only that we'd always try and kind of provide that service of like, if you like a snare drum, we'll stick a head on it and you can play it until you're totally content. Make sure you get something you're happy with.
Yeah.
Um,
So
it's like,
important. So
yeah,
important
yeah,
because obviously drummers might not have an opportunity to even. I know a lot of the clientele, and I know a lot of artists that I've played, or even when we're here doing our work at Collision, it's their first time drummers, or maybe some, it's definitely new to the industry, new to the art. So it's like they might not have had the luxury of getting on the road, but like you say, going to your local store and kind of being in the environment of obviously and really in a great space, with great people, and being able to go, actually, I like what I see there. It's a great finish. Does it sound as good as it looks? I'll be the judge of that. That's not a bad thing, saying I'm not a fan of that, but I much prefer this, because at the end of the day, your sound's unique to you. And again, you are in a really good space, Callum, to be able to go, right, I've been on the road with the Chili Pipers. I love this. I definitely have played that. I appreciate that sound, but that might come in handy down the road, or for a particular artist that walks through your door. I
yeah.
think it's a really good approach. No, hey, we're going to leave it there because I want to talk about this more on our masterclass as well. But I really appreciate your time, Callum. A real tradition we have within the Drum Club when it comes to obviously the brand, what we're about. Our slogan as a company is impact your sound. What does that mean to you as a statement, whether it's recording, touring, session work, or just you generally as a musician? What does impact your sound mean to you, Callum?
I think as a drummer, your sound is the most important thing. I mean, it's like, it's great having a nice looking drum kit. It's like, but sound fundamentally is what we do. That's like, it's why we do it. It's the reason we do it. So for me, it's like anything that has an impact on your sound, is paramount, I guess.
100%, 100%. I think we'll leave it there. Again, what a phenomenal artist. What a phenomenal engineer. We wish you every success. Again, we're going to post all the links to Callum, to again, the fabulous recording studio, again, Brookwood Recording, and again, based in city centre of Glasgow for any artists up north or UK wide or internationally that need some services and some support from Callum. He's the man for the job, okay? But again, if you've enjoyed what we've had to talk about today here, please don't forget to give us a subscription, drop a subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know in the comments as well what you thought of today's conversation. And again, if you want to be a part of our wonderful masterclass happening next week, there are spaces and seats left available. It's going to be a wonderful conversation. We look forward to it. Callum, thank you so much for joining us. And again, we'll see you
For
next
having
time,
me.
guys, at home.